welcome to our first general membership meeting for 2022. My name is Aaron Fox, and I'm your GLAR 2022 president. Today's virtual GMM will touch on the City of East Lansing's housing study and form-based zoning through the City of Lansing. It has been approved for 2 hours of elective Con Ed. Please make sure to stay logged in the entire time and participate in all poll questions and be active throughout today's meeting in order to receive credit. A couple quick GLAR updates. Non-list sales. There's been some upgrades made to the non-list sale process. Here's a quick video of MLS Chair Joe Vitale explaining those enhancements.
Hello, I'm Joe Vitale, the 2022 MLS Chair, and I'm here to talk about non-list sales. Non-list sales have become a hot topic, and we have some recent upgrades and enhancements that I think you'll all find beneficial. Previously, we weren't able to enter a non-list sale if we were involved in the ownership on either the listing or the sale, or maybe we didn't receive compensation, and that's all different. A non-list sale is a sale generated by an MLS participant that is not currently listed in the MLS. For example, this could be an expired listing, could be a co-op listing with a non-member or out-of-area member, or even a for sale by owner where a member is participating in agent capacity. There are a few new requirements, and I'd like to go over those with you. First and foremost, all non-list sales need to be entered into the MLS within 20 days of the closing, 20 business days of the closing. The data needs to include broker signature, listing import forms with all the required fields completed per property and signed by the broker, 10 photos required, which would include front elevation, kitchen, baths, living area, basement, outside, and exterior features. Room dimensions need to be added and proper square footage. The settlement statement needs to be uploaded, and the purchase agreement or agency disclosure. Failure to meet any of these criteria will result in the sale being removed from the MLS. Accurate data helps us all to be more effective, especially for appraisals and market analyses. If you have any questions, please reach out to the association at 323-4090. Thanks for your time.
Now a quick NAR Code of Ethics reminder. We are in the first year of the current 3-year cycle for 2022 to 2024. We also have upcoming GMMs February 24th. We'll cover home warranties and inspections. March 17th, GMM will have Dr. Lawrence Yoon with an economic update. Just so that you're aware, the source of Con Ed tracking is cemarketplace.net. Friendly reminder, please work safely and responsibly. Be sure you're practicing physical distancing and washing your hands. Thank you all for joining us today. Please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Andrew Fedewa with the City of Lansing. Andrew Fedewa is a planner with the City of Lansing's planning office for the last 2 years. After graduating MSU and before joining the planning office with the City of Lansing, Mr. Fedewa did zoning for 3 years in Flint. The Lansing Planning Office is committed to managing development through effective planning and zoning practices designed to enhance the quality of life in residential neighborhoods. Mr. Fedewa will be talking about districts, allowable uses for the form-based zoning, and cover areas on where to find information and contact info on their website. Welcome, Mr. Fedewa.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I'll just get right into it. Bear with me while I share my screen. So our form-based code was approved by City Council March 8th and took effect May 1st. As we were starting to work with the code, we also realized and starting to work with realtors as well as architects and civil engineers. There were some provisions that were a little bit stiff and or maybe did not quite read the way that we intended. So we put through a amendment draft this winter, and that just took effect January 1st. So there's a slightly different version from back in May, but largely it's the same document. Formerly, Lansing had a traditional zoning ordinance based on the separation of uses and emphasized land use over building form. Generally, that looks like residential neighborhoods are in one place, commercial areas are on the corridors, and industrial are set aside in a different area of the city. So there's a real big separation, and it's not very neighborhood friendly, and can sometimes have its own set of conflicts. A pure form-based code emphasizes the building form primarily, regardless of use. But Lansing's form-based code is actually a hybrid code that addresses both the land use and the building form. We really simplify, or we really revolve around the building form and the siting and the setbacks and all that. But there are also some use for allowable uses, permitted, conditional, or special, that really is trying to be context sensitive, because this is quite a large change for our city. So we do keep in mind that some uses may not be compatible in areas of the city when they abut each other. But for the most part, they are kind of expanded and simplified. By organizing around build to lines, number of floors, percentage of built site frontage, and street and building types, there will be a more uniform development pattern. Previously, and especially if you're in the city and you drive down our commercial corridors, you'll see one building right up against the street, might be small, might have a ton of parking, and then right next door, it'll have hundreds of feet of front yard parking, and then a tiny store way in the back, dangerous parking lots, no pedestrian amenities, no landscaping. So we really want to, with redevelopment, bring that sort of stuff into conformity and be a bit more harmonic with each other. Some of the form-based code benefits that we anticipate are design standards to improve and protect community character, opportunities for the missing middle of the housing market. For the most part, single-family neighborhoods are largely staying the same, but we also have some districts that allow for more duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, and small apartments. And if we get into the map a bit more, I can kind of get into that. It's more effective at transforming a site or district. In the previous code, there's a lot of differentiation between zoning districts. You might have F commercial zoning next to H industrial zoning next to residential. And here we're kind of really creating districts and corridors and neighborhoods. So when redevelopment does come, it might have a greater impact at a whole on a district or area level. This will also more adequately protect neighboring properties than conventional zoning. In this form-based code, there are standards for buffering and screening next to residential neighborhoods. This also supports transit-oriented development and pedestrian safety along corridors. Again, those corridors were single-use commercial zoning, and now many of them are mixed use that will allow for mixed-use development and also apartments directly on those corridors. So we're going to have residential dwelling units close to our transit stops for CATA. The form-based code is also easier to understand with more graphics and more predictable results. We really try to get away from that sea of text, just dozens and dozens, hundreds of pages of zoning text, and now there are more tables, there's more graphics to explain our provisions and what we mean by some of the standards in there. It can speed up development review. Since those standards are kind of laid out with diagrams, and also our site plans are reviewed administratively rather than through the planning board. So those review processes are much quicker. It can lead to denser urban environments where appropriate. Again, we're really kind of expanding those uses and allowing for higher buildings, more dwelling units where appropriate. And we're hoping for a critical mass that makes Lansing more livable, walkable, and more friendly to all types of users and uses. There are predictable yet flexible standards. It provides certainty, which can help secure financing. There are those standards, there are those provisions, but there are also little caveats or little carve-outs that, especially if a developer provides more green space, for instance, they can maybe have some flexibility on that lot coverage. So while there are standards, we also recognize that every parcel is different. Every development is different, and sometimes there are maybe accommodations that could be made. The design standards are already established before projects are submitted. That's mostly in chapter 1246, which I'll go over a bit more later on. But people can see those architectural standards for the buildings and the building form. So they kind of see what the city is looking for before they submit a site plan and then get replies back and then have to redo things and then, kind of do that, that cycle over and over. There's a wide array of uses permitted with more emphasis on the building types and site design. So again, we are trying to focus on that form, but we also kind of expand those permitted uses and what's kind of allowed by simplifying things. And also creates incentives. There's more flexibility allowed with the applicant provide certain benefits, such as green design, like I mentioned a little bit earlier there. Comparing the form ordinance and the form-based code just generally and quickly, residential, commercial, and industrial districts more or less remain at their current locations. We just expand what the form of development looks like and really simplify and expand the uses allowed. So they're they're more compatible and kind of synergy with each other. Most single-use commercial districts allow now for mixed-use commercial, office, and residential uses. So again, when you're going down our corridors and you only see, a laundromat or a secondhand store or a superstore, now we can really kind of infill those gaps with a more variety of uses and allow for residential dwelling units now. Single-family residential districts remain single-family. If anyone's gone into the comprehensive plan from 2012, we had what we call the PET map, the preserve, enhance, and transform. And that's where Lansing residents really told the planners and consultants what areas of the city they really wanted to preserve, which were their single family neighborhood districts, which they wanted to enhance. Those are our commercial and industrial districts. And that's why we now have these form standards. And then also the areas of the city that they want to transform, which are primarily our commercial corridors. And that's why there's such a huge leap between the old single-use commercial and now these mixed-use commercial corridors. All building sites and uses that were legally established under the prior zoning ordinance, but do not conform with the new form-based code are allowed to remain as grandfathered nonconformities. I know our office has been fielding a lot of realtor and developer questions about if a certain use or a certain development is allowed to stay in the form-based code district if there is, heaven forbid, a disaster or an act of God. So just as a blanket statement, whatever was legally established can remain, but there might be some discussions to be had if they are no longer conforming with the form-based code. There's not a one-to-one relationship between former and current zoning districts. As for the administration, it's kind of broken down in these parts with districts, general provisions, approval, and administrative. I think our people in the audience today are going to mostly be concerned about these districts and what's allowed in there. From the form-based code, you can find those in chapters 1243, 1244, and 1245. And a bit at the end, we'll get into where you can find the map, the use tables, and the district chapters. The form-based code chapters. A lot of our residents are going to be concerned about general provisions, and our landscape architects and civil engineers are going to be mostly concerned about landscaping and parking, as well as the approval when they're submitting site plans. I'll get into the districts in just a moment, but briefly, the chapter 1250 provisions covers anything from home occupations, temporary buildings, and accessory structures, the keeping of animals. So a big thing that we see, in especially our neighborhoods that have more urban farms, is an interest in livestock. Lansing, for what it is not really a farming community. So we do really prohibit wild animals and livestock, but do allow for the keeping of hens. There is also a new provision in there for demolitions. This provides the city with additional control when authorizing a request to demolish buildings for the purpose of constructing non-required parking. Lansing is littered with surface parking lots. So we really hate, especially in the downtown area, we really hate to see historic buildings go down just for surface parking when it's pretty bountiful. So this gives the city a bit more control and protection about saving our historic fabric. There's provisions in there for recreational vehicles, vehicle storage, parking is a big thing in front yard parking, for instance. There's new provisions for the outdoor seating allowed by right in most commercial zones. And then one thing that I'm not sure if this audience ever fields questions about marijuana, but currently that is governed by the other ordinance, chapter 1300, which still taps into the old zoning districts. Right now, that is in the process of being heard and updated to reflect form-based zoning districts, but is not currently approved yet. So if there's any questions about that, I'd be happy to take those at the end and maybe pass along some information about what might be passed. Chapter 1252 covers landscaping. This is something mostly absent from the former zoning code. And if it was required, it was pretty basic. Now this chapter regulates plant species, plant sizes, and spacing. There's a prohibition on invasive species, or what is considered invasive in Michigan. There's new provisions for interior site landscaping, so between the sidewalk and the building. And also a big thing is now parking lot landscaping, which was not mandated before, but now there are provisions in there to have trees rather, and flower beds, and really trying to bring up the appearance of our development and our districts. These were crafted for pedestrian and environmental benefits. So depending on how big a parking lot is, they will have to provide for either stormwater capture or recycling. And also there are provisions in there to really mandate pedestrian crossings and markings inside parking lots, especially going into the store. So we don't really have those as many conflicts between cars and people walking into stores and businesses. Our main goal is to break up that sea of parking with planting islands for stormwater retention and to reduce the urban heat effect. There is a provision in there that would have street trees, if not in planting islands, they will be along the border of the parking for those benefits. Also, there are buffering and screening requirements when a parking lot is within 10 feet of a residential used parcel or with a house on it, essentially, just so we don't have as many conflicts with headlamp glare, noise, and some of that trash from commercial buildings sometimes. Chapter 1254 covers off-street parking. Largely, these calculations for parking are based on on types such as residential, place of assembly, office, retail, restaurant, industrial, etc. These are mostly holdovers from the old zoning code, which we could take another look at because some of it is a bit excessive. But there are many stipulations in there to reduce parking, such as lot sharing, available public parking in the vicinity, and allow for employer incentives for employees to use public transit, bicycles, or to live in the neighborhood. We really are trying to cut down on surface parking lots that are maybe a bit excessive based on those parking minimums. There are also in certain districts just a blanket statement for a reduction in that grand total based on if that district is urban or pedestrian focused. There is a section of that chapter just for bicycle parking. So pretty much every new development, especially of a commercial or industrial nature, business nature essentially, will require bicycle parking spots. And to limit excessive parking, the number of parking spaces can only be exceeded by 20% of the minimum. So unless there's a very valid reason that has to go through the zoning administrator, people can't just keep putting in surface parking lot because they believe they need it if it's above our minimums. So getting into how the form-based code actually works, somebody will want to check the zoning district map first, and I'll get into that link in just a moment. That really is interactive and helps you find directly what you're looking for. Determine the street type. This is a map that is on our page as well that you can, any developer can check, and that's mostly who's going to be concerned with it for those redevelopment projects as the developer or their civil engineer. And then as for the code, you're going to want to review the master use table. This lays out the permitted conditional special uses. And then from there, for developments, they're going to want to follow the site layout requirements. That has to do with building massing, the height, frontage, and upper floor setbacks, the building placements with those setbacks, parking configuration, where those parking facilities are allowed, largely getting away from the front parking configuration and putting that in the side or the rear. And then there's also chapter 1246, the architectural standards, which goes a bit beyond these district regulations to really get into the floor heights, the fenestration, the allowable materials on the building, the roof types, articulation, access, and where mechanical and service equipment goes. So I'm going to skip a little bit ahead because I know I have a link to share with the map. So we'll go right into step 3. The use table is in those chapters, 1243, 1244, and 1245, the residential, commercial, and special. But there is also a allowable use table that really is comprehensive. That kind of breaks it down by these overarching uses and then lays out if they're allowed and if there's any conditions. Largely, these are very basic conditions about if they're allowed on certain street types, or if they're a certain something like a vehicle sales, for instance. There's more conditions there to put in more screening requirements so they're not so detrimental to the built environment. I'm just going to quickly get into a question that I saw. There many times a homeowner will expand their driveway without a permit. Is this allowed under the code? No, first, I mean, if they're expanding their driveway to meet the width of their garage, it is allowed without a permit. But if they're trying to expand especially in the front yard, that's a no-go, or they'll have to talk to building or public services about it. As an extension of that, if they want to expand their driveway out into the backyard past the garage, that's something that is allowed, but we would want to talk about that with the zoning administrator. So an easy way of saying that is we really encourage people to talk to the zoning administrator because every lot's different. Every parcel is set up a certain way. So it really is kind of a case-by-case basis. Getting back into the code, again, going back to that kind of readability nature of the code, this really kind of gives a district feel of what redevelopment should look like and what we're really hoping for as a city. And then it describes the intent and gets into those site layout requirements. So for example, if we're talking about MX3, which is Old Town, Rio Town, and Michigan Avenue, this is what it would look like for the building height. There's a minimum and a maximum. There is a required upper floor step back. So if the building is within so many feet of a neighboring residential district, anything above the second floor has to be an equal amount of distance away from the residential district. I know that's a little confusing, but as you can see in that, if you can maybe hopefully see in that diagram, that C, whatever's closest to that residential district has to remain at 2 stories, just so that if there is a 6-story building, it's not towering over a residential house too closely. We have provisions in there for the build to line. So before there was a setback. So as long as you were meeting that setback, you could have your building 50, 100, 150 feet away from the right of way. But now we're really trying to bring those buildings up to the sidewalk, make it more pedestrian friendly, make it a bit more standardized, and put that parking in the rear. As for step 5, architectural standards, again, this is going to mostly be for the civil engineers, but we get into the projections, the fenestration of buildings, the allowable building materials, the facade, and example building types, just so there's an understanding of what buildings need to not necessarily look like, but there's that range of standards. So getting into the district summaries, there's a lot. I will preface this as saying there's a lot of them. The former planner that I kind of took over for and the consultants really got into the land use table, the master plan, and really created a lot of districts that could be condensed. That's a change we're hoping to make in the near future. But right now, a lot of these districts are pretty similar. So I hope nobody gets a little flustered or confused about just the amount of districts. More or less, they are pretty similar to each other. For instance, suburban, commercial, and mixed-use urban corridor are pretty similar, and they are neighboring each other on our commercial corridors, largely south Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, Cedar Street, and Pennsylvania. These are more designed for the single tenant or strip commercial, but again, only allowing for one double bay parking out in the front. So we're really getting, even for our most suburban style commercial corridors, that parking in the front is being minimized as much as possible to really get those parking lots to the side and the rear. Mixed use urban corridor allows for mixed use, which we really encourage, especially around our transit stops, but is not required. And it doesn't necessarily have to be mixed use. They could also be apartment buildings on these corridors as well. These buildings front the street, and only one bay of front yard parking is allowed along suburban or arterial corridors. So again, really trying to stress that the days of front yard seas of parking are over, and we're really trying to get to a pedestrian and standardized developments. MX1, mixed use neighborhood center. These are around specific intersections around the city. These are usually your corner stores around residential neighborhoods. Buildings are going to front the street and also allow for mixed use. So the corner store can allow for apartment buildings above. Really trying to make those neighborhood intersections really worthwhile and beneficial for the surrounding neighborhood. I'm going to assume that poll went up for everyone. Should I allow for people to take that real quick?
You can go ahead and keep talking, Andrew.
Okay, thank you. MX2, Mixed Use Community Center. Again, very similar. These are those important intersections, important areas of the city, but they're more of a district wide. These are for Frandor and Logan Square and Cedar and Miller area. They very variety of uses. They expand dimensions and setbacks and such to really be to really realize these are people coming in from neighborhoods and the surrounding, even neighboring cities, to come shop or play or do whatever they really need to do. MX3, which I briefly touched on, are Rio Town, Old Town, and Michigan Avenue. These are, the redevelopment is really to allow for dense, active, urban, and mixed use development close to downtown. It's kind of those, if downtown's a little too busy for you, these are very vibrant districts around and a bit more residential focused. Downtown 1 Urban Edge is the, as you might have known, the edge of downtown, especially the residential neighborhoods north and west of the downtown core. It recognizes that some of these buildings have been converted to office, but really allows for the residential, especially single family or duplexes or that missing middle to remain and not really encourage redevelopment. These will retain the historic houses and but also allow for conversion to low intensity uses. And this is a transition area between downtown and some of the more single family residential neighborhoods. Downtown 2 Urban Flex is the area largely bordered by or east of the river and east of downtown, I should say, and around Cedar and Larch and Saginaw down to Kalamazoo. A lot of this through prior planning efforts was industrial. But if you've gone down in that area lately, you may have noticed that there are really zero industrial businesses, but it's really close to the heart of downtown and the center of our city. So we really took an opportune moment to really expand the uses and allowable building types in this area to kind of transition from vacant lots and old unused industrial buildings to a mix of residential, commercial, research and development, light industry, kind of new economy and entertainment uses. So it's one of our most varied districts. And then downtown 3, the downtown core, is our main heart of downtown. This will be the highest density and has no height maximum. And it's just very walkable and mix of uses with active storefronts. We've also made single use parking lots, a special land use. So really trying to minimize any new surface lots that will have to go through a longer process and more scrutiny. So we don't have these big craters of surface lots in our downtown area. And with the expanded form-based code allowable uses and building types, we really hope for new infill redevelopment that is pretty ripe for new residential, new commercial, new retail, new office, and hopefully get away from these breakups in the urban fabric downtown. Industrial, this is one of those areas that probably could be condensed into 2, but for whatever reason, it's 3. Our suburban industrial is mostly those pockets north of town by the railroad and the southeast corner around Miller and Pennsylvania that are kind of a campus setting of industrial that look largely like that picture. This can range from light to medium to kind of heavy industrial uses that aren't suitable next to residential developments. So they're kind of clustered kind of by themselves. So again, we're kind of being context sensitive to Lansing, that we want to move towards a form-based code, but there are certain realities in our city that still require a separation of uses. Industrial 2 is largely the GM plant downtown and north of Old Town. It's a range of industrial uses, but are largely confined to the building. And then industrial 3 are our urban industrial. These are our historically industrial sites within the city that do kind of have that that development design of the 20s and 30s, especially around Hazel Street and north of Old Town as well. But they're also, if not maybe good for industrial development, they do provide for adaptive reuse and could provide for a conversion to residential dwelling units. Then there's institutional 1 and institutional 2. These are mostly centered to our educational, government, and medical facilities. Largely right now, they are Sparrow Hospital downtown and McLaren Hospital to the southeast that just got developed. But we're really trying to get away from those kind of suburban business park designs and kind of make them more interwoven with the neighboring residential and commercial areas. So they're not such a, I guess, sea of industrial or institutional uses that one has to drive to. We're really trying to make them more accessible to transit and the neighborhood. So the one that really can be condensed is all of our residential. We got a little bit too specific about certain areas, certain neighborhoods of the city, but largely industrial 1, 2, and 3 are the same areas of the city, mostly in the southeast and southwest wards. A bit less density for single family, more of a subdivision design or rural characteristics. One thing that was in our old code was, or the one that got passed March and took effect May, was these minimum and maximum heights. They kind of varied across the board, which would make houses non-conforming for no real reason. So with this edit and with a future looking to condense these, we made them the exact same across the board. So we don't have some of our single story houses become non-conforming for no real reason. As an extension of that, R4 and R5 are single family, but more of the urban neighborhoods of our city. The biggest difference is going to be your R6B. This allows for multiple family, especially along corridors, but in between some of our commercial areas that can be up to 6 units, specifically in R6B. So that's really where our missing middle dwelling units are ripe for redevelopment. If there are, sadly, back in 2008 to 2014, during the recession, we saw some homes go down, and so there are parcels that are vacant. If they haven't found a use yet, they would be ripe for that missing middle opportunity for redevelopment. RMX is our residential areas, largely separating, or largely as kind of a buffer between higher intensity corridors and the residential neighborhoods. This allows for a variety of housing types, from single family that may be existing, so it's not non-conforming, but also duplexes, that missing middle, up to 8 units or so, but also small apartment buildings. But again, that parking is, especially for our apartment buildings, that parking's in the rear, and really trying to be pedestrian focused and part of the neighborhood. Multifamily campus are those areas largely developed in the 60s and 70s, big plots of land that have a variety or numerous apartment buildings kind of laid out in a campus setting. These mostly just are made to make those districts conforming, because they were largely developed under a zoning district that is no longer in use and hasn't been in use for a long time. And then a new one that we see is adaptive reuse. These are our former school sites and also some churches that unfortunately the Lansing public school system has seen condensation, and some of our old school buildings are no longer used. And then they really face some challenges by being large lots with land or green landscaping and an old building that really needs some love. So we've really expanded the allowable uses, especially for multifamily residential, but also allowed for new housing, either single family or duplexes, elsewhere on that school property site if it doesn't get split. So to really make it dynamic and ripe for redevelopment. So getting into resources, again, the first version of this took effect May 1st, and then a new amendment draft was just passed and is now in effect. That link is going to lansingmi.gov/374/zoning is going to be your best spot for information. There's a little screen grab there to the right that shows there's an interactive text document. There's a allowable use table and that street typology map to really get into the weeds of things. But above that a little bit is that Lansing parcel viewer. It's an interactive zoning map. That's going to be everyone's best bet to find the zoning for a specific parcel. And if I can reshare my screen real quick. This is our Lansing parcel viewer. You're going to want to turn on Lansing tax parcels. And just for example, I'm going to share one of my neighbors that are near me. So if anyone wanted to confirm the zoning, and my office is happy to take phone calls, but this really is easy to use. You just type in your address. That takes you to the parcel. And then you can turn on the form-based code layer. Oops, excuse me. And that shows you what that's zoned as. And then you can really get an idea of that, what's near it. If a prospective buyer is interested and they aren't really sure what's allowed nearby, you can kind of give them an idea. And if anyone in the audience sees any materials or handouts that would help us explain any part of the form-based code or its chapters, please let us know. I'm always trying to make this easier for people to understand and read through. So I would be happy for any input. And with that, thank you for your time and allowing me to speak. Again, that link is right there, 374-zoning, and any questions can be sent directly to my email, and I'd be happy for these slides to be shared.
Andrew, we do have some audience questions for you right now.
Thank you. So I'm trying to take Mr. Lum's about, are we seeing any similar levels of increased efficiency in the approval process with the hybrid type code? Administratively, especially when people have maybe a rendering or an idea, but not a full set of site plans, we're getting really quick feedback to them about what's allowed or what we would like to see with some of those site layout requirements. But also, I think administratively, Sue Stachowak, our zoning administrator, is seeing a reduced time of site plan review, especially when it goes out to, when she forwards it on to our other departments like building safety or public service, which maybe doesn't touch the form-based code, but she's with this code, she's able to really send those on quicker than she was previously. I have a question there for, there's trouble with the website link to work. I will double check that, but I believe that is the one. If you are having any trouble, you can also go to lansingmi.gov/planning. That takes you right to our division site. And from there, you can click on zoning. And then what is the junkyard on Cedar Street near downtown? I'm having a little trouble picturing that. If you would want to email me a screen grab or an address if you have one, and we can look into that a bit more. And Mr. Lum asked if BSNA, the zoning code field, still reflects the previous code. Is there a timeline for those fields to be updated? I would love to have an answer to that. It's been a little trying to get with BSNA just because they're a separate company, they're a contractor for us. I will say that we are in discussions, and right now there's a yearly update of zoning changes and parcel changes to reflect lot splits and lot combinations that is done with the assessing and our IT and the zoning office. So once we get that situated, probably in March, we will be sending the entire parcel list to BSNA and really stress for them to update that old code. So it's easier for realtors and developers to see the zoning code that's current, so they're not seeing those the old and new kind of contradict each other. Freeman, so close to Old Town. Yeah, I think that's the one you're mentioning. That one has been around for over 100 years. It was there before we even had the first zoning code. So right now it's kind of legally non-conforming, more or less, but we are really on them, especially when we see debris or those huge stacks of scrap going above the fence that's there. We're in discussions with them to kind of push it back or kind of separate things so there's not such an eyesore. But unfortunately, yeah, from our point of view, since it's been around for over 100 years, it's legally non-conforming. We saw another discussion about BSNA. Yeah, as soon as I will try to update that, so there's not those contradictions as soon as I can.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Fedewa. We greatly appreciate it. Up next, we have Tom Fehrenbach with the City of East Lansing. Welcome, Tom. Tom is an East Lansing native, MSU graduate, and since graduating in 2001, he's found his passion for community building. After nearly a decade in the private sector, he decided to pursue his career in economic and community development. He served as manager of the economic development for the city of Palo Alto, California from 2010 to 2016. After finding his way back to East Lansing, Tom joined the City of East Lansing as the Community and Economic Development Administrator and currently serves as Deputy City Manager and Director of Planning, Building, and Development. Mr. Fehrenbach will be discussing some key takeaways from the recently completed Housing Target Market Analysis and Housing Strategic Plan, and the steps the city is taking to address challenges outlined in their near-term action plan. Good morning, Mr. Fehrenbach.
Good morning, Aaron. Thanks for having me, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for giving me the chance to share with you what is an important project for the City of East Lansing. Let me see here. I'm sharing the wrong thing. Hold on one second here. Okay, so the City of East Lansing recently completed a housing study and a housing strategic plan, and that is really the goal today, is to kind of share with you our key findings in terms of the study and sort of what the near-term actions that we're going to be undertaking. There's a lot to this study, and I would welcome you to visit our website, cityofeastlansing.com/housing study, where you can find all of the documents, hundreds and hundreds of pages to peruse through, as well as a lot of historical documents, as well as obviously housing in a city that's been around since 1907 is going to always be a big topic for us, and always something that we need to continually look at as we try to plan for the future. So we completed a target market analysis in October of 2021, and really the main thrust of this study was to try to determine how best to diversify the types of housing and the types of people that are living in East Lansing. Obviously, as a college town, the market demands from students who often have the support of their parents to rent per bed, it really puts a lot of pressure on our market. And so we are looking ultimately for ways to welcome other segments of the market and to make sure that our market is accessible and attainable. And that was really the key thrust of this TMA, was to kind of figure out, who are the most likely people, what are they looking for, and ultimately then create a strategy to figure out how we can make that happen from an economic standpoint, from a development standpoint, in a way that's really aligned with our community's goals. So lots of conversations, even prior to the analysis, we had several conversations with our council and planning commission. And of course, we were just about to enter into the study in March of 2020, when we had to totally retool our expectations based on COVID and kind of figure out how to reset the decks, but ultimately leading to this completed study, along with a number of appendices that are really interesting stuff. I'll get into the highlights here, but if you want to get into the weeds on your own, I would certainly welcome that. But obviously lots of conversations at our planning commission and our housing commission, and ultimately leading to a joint meeting of the two of those, many conversations with council, ultimately leading to this document is really a short-term strategic plan, or our near-term action plan, which I will get into. Right. So in terms of the key takeaways from the study, I think there's about 13 of them. And some of them, most of them are pretty intuitive, really, in terms of, things that we kind of expected to come out of this, but it's really good to quantify some of these things and have an understanding based on, housing experts who do this all around the state and in various parts of the country, to really affirm some of what we believe. And the first takeaway is that there really is ample opportunities for student housing, ample supply. The biggest sort of key in this is that the number of beds that we've added to the marketplace that are geared really towards students in the last 5 years, it's over 2,000, has really outpaced the growth of enrollment. So that's one big point. But ultimately, the fact that we've added so much density over the course of time, that's essentially geared towards students, along with our neighboring opportunities for students in kind of neighboring jurisdictions. Ultimately triangulating multiple data sources. Our consultant and team has pretty strongly stated that the future of housing in East Lansing, and as far as opportunities for students, has really been met. And at this point, it's really thinking about how to redevelop some of what exists to continue to provide that. Now we do, of course, went back to the beginning here. I don't know how to run my slides. Now, in saying that, we do have also a significant attainability problem. And again, I think a big portion of the reason why is because of the pressures from the student market, who can afford pretty high rents on a per bed basis. And that sort of has the effect of putting additional and significant pressure on kind of the more affordable aspects of our market. What's interesting is that it's really not just about renters, it's also about buyers that want to move to East Lansing. And so we determined that if we can provide some options for new renters and buyers at the below market rates, that we could attract significant kind of new people to our marketplace. That's a big takeaway. The third really hits to kind of a lot of the goals of the study, and it's really to increase the diversity and equity of our city. And based on this study and based on the analysis, the best way to do that is through making housing more attainable. There's a direct correlation between providing opportunities for folks that are, both low to moderate income, but also, as it pertains to, 80% AMI, but also as it relates to just this, sort of the missing middle that Andrew kind of talked about a little bit as well. So by providing opportunities to make housing more affordable, more attainable, ultimately we will help to address some of the equity issues that we have. Obviously they're significant, and we need to focus on that over time, and it's not something that's a quick fix. But this is one of the strategies I think we'll get into during our near-term housing portion, the action plan, where we will really get into some of the strategies that we will go into. So there's a question here: how does the new MSU policy that some students must live on campus affect the study, or was it taken into account in the study? It was noted in the study, but obviously the effects we aren't really going to see until that policy unfolds, and ultimately we're not going to be able to really truly see the effects until we're kind of in a non-COVID or post-COVID or whatever the future holds in terms of that particular situation. It's definitely something we noted. It's definitely something we're going to continue to have to, analyze and track, but not something that this particular study really provided insights in, other than, the expectation that it may reduce some of the pressures of the rental market in terms of housing, because more people will be living longer on campus as opposed to off campus. Okay, so another key takeaway is that we are losing our market share to neighboring municipalities. And I think a main feature of this takeaway is that it's probably mostly due, or in part due, to availability. As I'm sure all of you are aware, the inventory in East Lansing has been very low for quite some time, and we don't have a lot of opportunities, especially in that missing middle part of the market. And so that's it's a factor that turns a lot of people away from East Lansing into other places. Ultimately, from a specific East Lansing perspective, I think capturing more of that market share would help us to be more diversified, and therefore more resilient to changes in the economy. Also, no surprise, we have very high movership rates, largely due to the fact that we're a college town, and we have students that come here for 4 years and then move away. And obviously, well, I don't know if it's obvious, but that's certainly something we're trying to work on in terms of having more opportunities for students to think of East Lansing, and frankly the greater Lansing area, as a place to have a career and build a life and have a family and all of that. And so that is one of the things we ultimately are trying to address through this understanding. But what's further been interesting is that the movership rates are not just students, and that was one of the insights of this effort, is that really the movership rates are high across all our income, housing, tenures, and age brackets, and they're significantly higher across all of them than Ingham County as a whole. And that may be part and due to the fact that due in part to the fact that we are a university town, and a lot of people that come here to live are connected to the university for a period of time, and then maybe have other opportunities in other areas of the country. But it's definitely something that we want to think about in terms of what can the city do, how can we effectuate planning that may allow for folks to see this less as a transitory kind of stop in their career, and more as a place to kind of find a permanent residency. And that's something that's near and dear to my heart, having lived here, gone to MSU, and then moved to California, where I was for 15 years. Making the decision to come back here was largely in part to, the fact that I have a large family in the area, the fact that, our children that are growing up in East Lansing can have the opportunity to, have good housing and have, access to parks and different types of amenities. So, from the personal perspective, as well as kind of the planning perspective, I think there's a lot we can work with in terms of our assets to build upon, to help, help to share that narrative to more people and ultimately work on this. But again, I think it points back to the need for addressing different types of housing and different stratas of kind of pricing that just don't exist or exist in a very small way in East Lansing right now. So most of the buyers in our market are looking for detached single family homes, although demand does exist for townhomes and other attached housing types if it's provided with the right amenities. And I think that from my perspective, part of the reason that we glean this from the study is that most of what you see in terms of for sale product in East Lansing is detached single family homes. And so our market does not have a lot of townhomes or other types of like attached housing for buyers. And I feel strongly that if we could create those opportunities, the demand is in the marketplace. But that may be more of an intuition of mine than something that we could back up with data. Seventh takeaway is that the new renters in the markets, especially the non-students, I think we were kind of targeting here, they do prefer attached units. So the folks are looking for kind of the more multifamily type products for a variety of reasons, but they're not necessarily looking to rent kind of the single family homes here in East Lansing. And again, that may be due in part to the type of inventory that we have in terms of single family rentals. But ultimately, I think it also speaks to the type of lifestyle clusters that are looking to rent in East Lansing. It's really across the board, but most of them from our intuition from the study are preferring kind of the urban single multifamily lifestyle with the amenities, of course, that come along with that. So this is probably not a surprise. I mean, the students in our market often don't have very high or have very low incomes on paper because they're like I was when I was 19. Kind of building up. Most of what we have in the way of resources are provided by our families and or our ability to have jobs in the local area, and so you may be aware that that particular pressure puts a lot of changes the demography of our city quite significantly, and but ultimately the upper income population is really made up of families and retirees in East Lansing. So this is kind of going to the first part of that point, which is that singles make up the lower income population. And obviously it's largely due to the presence of MSU students, not entirely, but again, when we're a city of about 50,000 people and we have, about half of those folks are students, that makes for a lot of interesting demographics and behavioral dynamics and everything else. So definitely, one of the realities of being a college town and all the good and not so good stuff that comes along with that. So we do know that there's higher demand than supply of the attached units. That we have about a 5% differential on what the demand is versus what the supply ultimately is in East Lansing. One of the difficult challenges that we have is that the new things that are built tend to attract students. And so, if we're really trying to be more diverse in terms of the types of people that are able to live in East Lansing, students tend to rent by the bed. They tend to have, the support of their parents. And so they put some artificial pressures on, what the market can bear in terms of cost. And again, I think that's, a theme that we see throughout the study. It is certainly something we're cognizant of. On the other hand, we also don't want to discriminate against students. And we have actually ordinance and law on the books that prohibits us from doing that. So really the only ways that we can try to help welcome kind of the non-student folks is to try to focus on policies and programs that support low to moderate income, support the 55 and over clientele, and also support owner occupied residences. And it's fairly limiting, but we do have some strategies, and we'll get to those in a few minutes. So we do have significant market potential. There's people that want to be here across all spectrums of the market, but it's specifically singles and young professionals across all income brackets. And I think, with some of the recent happenings in terms of, MSUs and technology being, transferred over into commercialization and companies figuring out how to pull talent out of the university and create opportunities. We are hopeful that this is a shift that's going to continue to move. Obviously, the Federal Credit Union has done a fantastic job of figuring out that paradigm, and they're making a big investment in downtown with a 7-story office building that's currently being developed. Also, TechSmith, a company that's currently in Aladdin Township, is consolidating a headquarters in East Lansing on the campus of MSU, where Spartan Village is. And that is also, I think, a really positive step forward, and sort of some of the market forces that are creating demand and creating this market potential, certainly for East Lansing. So, obviously, most of what we've seen in terms of recent development, specifically downtown with the high density, high rise apartments with mixed use on the ground floor, has been really geared towards students and kind of the way that they can within our structure. We do require that anything that's built be designed in such a way that it's not student centered, so that it has the potential for other types of demographics to want to or potentially could live there in a normal situation. We also require that if you're going to build mixed use in our core downtown, that 25% be one of those diversified uses that we can support vis-a-vis low to moderate income, 55 and over, or owner occupied. And so we've seen, some of that product come into our downtown. Obviously the Newman Lofts is a 55 and over right on Albert, where our former surface lot used to be. On the ground floor, there's Jolly Pumpkin and Barrio and Foster Coffee and Bank of America. Upstairs is the replacement of our surface lot with a 600 space 5-story parking structure, and then above that is 5 stories of units that are specifically for 55 and over clientele. And that was how they satisfied our requirement. Ultimately, we'll see how that plays out. Obviously, in the beginning period of that, with the overlay of COVID, they did not do so well in terms of renting those units. I think they're doing somewhat better, but I think the success of that ultimately experiment is yet to be kind of seen. And obviously COVID continues and has put some pressure specifically on that portion of the market. So we will see. We also have a 99 unit apartment building that's approved. 74 units of it are low to moderate income qualified. That is the second phase of the project that put the Graduate Hotel and the Abbott in the ground. And we're expecting that they'll be pulling building permits at any point. They are now fully approved for that. They have final site plan approval. And so we are hopeful that we'll see those units in our marketplace as well. But ultimately, the key here from a city standpoint is that new units really should be marketed to a broader range than just beyond just the student market. And I am starting to understand that there are other market segments that really can be economically feasible beyond just the student market that ultimately we hear the most about, of course, being a college town. So I think there's some hope there. What rental price is considered low to moderate income? That's a great question. I don't have the specifics on that, but it would be basically like 80% of what the rental, the average rental price in East Lansing. So it's still kind of on the high end when you look at the greater Lansing area. And again, some of that is kind of artificial based on what folks can get on a per bed basis. So there's sort of there's the mechanics of LMI, and then there's the realities of, hitting demographics in East Lansing that, might not qualify for, the 80% of AMI, but might be able to afford something that's less than what currently is listed in the marketplace, if that makes sense. All right, so our final kind of big takeaway is essentially a no-brainer, but it's good to remind ourselves that as the unit size increases, the price per square foot decreases. And I think this is especially important to note when we think about, families and the types of situations where people can live in different types of housing, especially in kind of the missing middle area of the market. So concurrently with the TMA, which is very dense, and I've just given you, really high level overview of. We also worked with our team and a consultant to create a strategic plan for housing in East Lansing, and it's very exhaustive, and it includes both kind of strategies that are implementable now, things that really need a lot of investigation, and then kind of a laundry list of ideas in terms of things we can pursue. And so in speaking with our council and with the Planning Commission and Housing Commission, we really decided that what we need to do in order to digest this, because it's such a broad topic, and we do want to engage the community as much as possible and help them understand, some of what we're dealing with, that we would ultimately operationalize the broad housing strategic plan into a short-term or near-term action plan. And that in and of itself is going to be a lot of work over the course of probably, several years, but ultimately trying to really focus on what are the priority strategies that we can implement or explore the implementation of here in the near term to really move the needle on diversification of housing and move the needle on providing opportunities for our city to grow in ways that are compatible with our community's vision. And so that's what we have created, and it's really what we're working from now. the first thing we're working on is a big conversation, and it's happened in various forms in the city's past, certainly in the last 30 years. I grew up on the 600 block of Gunson, and have seen firsthand sort of how things have changed, how the pressures of the rental market have had effects on our neighborhoods. And in terms of our master planning effort that culminated in 2018, our city really did a lot of thinking about the downtown. It's a longitudinal downtown. It's very long and narrow. And I think part of the goal is to provide some additional density in kind of a step down manner as you go from the downtown core kind of Grand River to the north into those neighborhoods. There's a lot of rental, mostly student rental in that area. And the economics probably don't work for a one-to-one redevelopment of what's currently there. And so without kind of significant changes to our zoning in this area, we're probably not going to be incentivizing a lot of redevelopment. And so one of the visions of the master plan is really to look at, again, kind of allowing for additional density in that area as you step down to the north. It's a big conversation, and one that we are now empowered to begin. At the same time, we've just completed, similar to Lansing, we're on a track to look at a form-based code for the city, specifically to downtown. We haven't adopted it, and we're not as far along as Lansing, certainly. And we're trying to learn as much as we can from their implementation as well. But we did go through a large effort at the Planning Commission, and have recently just completed their work and transmitted a draft of a form-based code. And one of the key takeaways is really kind of allowing for a mix of uses, allowing for some bonuses in terms of height and density, and having some flexibility in terms of some of the setbacks to allow for kind of a product that would hit the balance of being economically feasible for the developers and being of the right kind of form that it would be in line with our community's goals. So really, this was envisioned in the master plan, and we now have a lot of the learnings from the form-based code effort. And the idea is to attempt to add these elements to our zoning code, allowing the step down, additional density that steps down in this area as a starting point. And this is a conversation we were supposed to begin this month with our planning commission, but because of the COVID situation, our city has decided to cancel all of our public meetings. We didn't want to, potentially put our volunteer commissioners at risk. So that's probably been punted. Hopefully we'll be able to get back on track with this in February. But there'll be a lot of neighborhood engagement, a lot of opportunities for the real estate community as well to come and give us your opinions and feedback. We're very interested in kind of the economic side of this. We may be doing a study in terms of what that really looks like, what type of density would really need to exist in order to incentivize the redevelopment of this area. So we're very, very much interested in those aspects. And there's another question here. What is being done specifically to attract the diversity in housing to include more families and seniors versus students? Thinking of mainly building types as opposed to merely pricing. It's a great question. I'm going to touch on that in terms of one of our strategies here. And then Troy DeLong, I've noticed that quite a few properties, multi-unit in the East Lansing city proper, have had their 2019 to 2020 SEVs jump anywhere from 20 to 40% after the rent study was completed. Is that directly related to the rent study? If so, what was the justification for this? The added tax cost after the property is sold and uncapped will almost always be passed down to the renters, hence making the housing less affordable. Are there options for owners, current and future borrowers, to position these largely increased SEVs? Great question. Lots of detail there. Our city assessor is the one that establishes what the equalized value and the taxable values are. And he does that through a number of different algorithms that he uses, typically for a commercial building that's leased, that he will get into kind of the price-based model, the cost-based model. And I think that we were all a bit surprised by the jump, particularly the developers. And I think that, ultimately the estimates coming into it were conservative versus what they were able to get on a per bed basis. And so ultimately, I think when that was added into his calculus, there was a bit of a surprise in terms of the taxable value of certainly the Park District project, the hub, and Center City. In terms of options people have, we do have a board of appeals, a board of review that will hear cases. Typically, they're going to want to see, financial documentation to show that, the estimates that were made by the assessor are flawed in some way. And if they don't get satisfaction at the board of review, they do have the opportunity to go to the state tax tribunal. So really, in terms of the planning aspects, we can do as good as we can. We definitely speak with the city assessor, but it's always on a conceptual basis. And then when something's in the ground, it's really up to the assessor on his own to determine, based on the science that he is, an expert in, to determine those values. But they do have recourse through the tax tribunal ultimately. So hopefully that answers that question. And let's move on. All right. So the big kind of takeaway, and again, kind of going on the main thrust of our study, which is to try to diversify the opportunities. We really want to intentionally address the equity issues that we have in housing across the board. And so the short-term strategies that we have is one, to review the existing programs that we do have that serve low to moderate income individuals and families. We, through our community development block grant program, provide down payment assistance for folks that want to purchase housing. We also have a rehabilitation program for folks who own properties but need to bring them into code compliancy or want to age in place and need things like accessibility ramps and kind of other zero access and other types of upgrades to their houses. We also have a pretty significant program currently in terms of our coronavirus support monies through HUD, where we provide mortgage and utility assistance, and we have an employee home ownership program for both the City of East Lansing employees and Michigan State University employees. But many of these have existed for a long time. The rules haven't changed much. The amounts haven't changed much. What we really need to do is review these existing programs and look at, are they, have an honest evaluation of, are they working? Are there things that we could do better? Should we change some of the number limits? Should we provide additional services beyond, kind of the housing support seminars and things that we do through our partners with the community, the capital area housing partnership, et cetera. And I think that, we're already diving into this. We are looking into making some changes, and hopefully that will increase the utilization of these programs. We're also looking at other funding sources beyond just our CDBG monies, especially as so much money is becoming available through the federal government and other sources. So how we can really increase the utilization and make these more accessible to folks is a big goal. We're also really wanting to work with realtors as well as people in the financial sector to identify what are some of the gaps in terms of borrowing and lending, and what might the city be able to do to address some of these gaps. We have an interesting experiment in this that's underway. We have through a housing project that was developed 14 years ago, we have $300,000 in basically a fund that is specifically earmarked to help convert rental units in a specific neighborhood, the Chesterfield neighborhood, to owner-occupied units. It's a long story, but it was basically what the developer was able to provide in terms of the negotiation of their Campus Village 2 project. They did convert, I think, 7 properties, and then ultimately funded this fund for the rest of them. We've been working through, for the last 6 months or so, working to create a program that would allow this money to be used in various ways to sort of address some of the gaps we know, specifically to converting some of these units, but also to deal with some of the economics of converting rental to owner occupied when there's a value, a commodity value to the rental licenses themselves. So we're also looking at what are some of the new services, funding sources, and potential partners. And this is where we have a lot of big ideas. Some of you may be familiar with the Avondale Square project. It's the 600 block of Virginia Avenue. That was a big idea from 2006-ish that ultimately came to fruition, where the city acted as the developer. We stepped in and acquired, I think, ultimately 26 parcels, and then we partnered with both a for-profit and a nonprofit housing developers to redevelop that entire block. And it's been incredibly successful from a transformation standpoint. I'm sure some of you or most of you might be familiar with that block. It's really great, and it replaced a product that was certainly aging in place, past its useful life, and created opportunities for 26 different families, several of which are low to moderate income qualified. But that's the best part of that project, is you'd never know the difference because all of the houses are built to the same level of quality. And so that was a big idea. It was very successful from a transformation perspective, but I think we learned a lot in terms of the financials. The market changed at the worst possible moment. We purchased the parcels for pretty high value. And ultimately, the city subsidized that project pretty significantly through both our CDBG funds, where we took out a Section 108 loan, but also through some general fund monies to help finance some bonds that are still being paid off to this day. And so it was several $1 million of subsidy. And I think some people in our community think it was a bit too much subsidy, but ultimately those are the types of things we need to look at as in terms of big ideas. What are some of the things maybe we can learn from that project to avoid putting that kind of exposure on the city's general fund, but to make some of these projects actually happen, some of these transformations happen. And again, it's tied directly to the first strategy, which is, allowing additional density in specific areas and having certain, bonuses available for certain things, like making opportunities for LMI, like, making sure things are designed in such a way that they are attractive to families, to seniors, et cetera. Those are some of, I think, the tools that we would have to negotiate with by making some of these things available. Did the study address short-term rentals? Not really. I think there's some information about that. There is a lot going on in terms of the state legislation right now that we are paying very close attention to in terms of short-term rentals. In East Lansing, in order to have a short-term rental currently, you need to have a rental license. One of our, normal class 1 through 6 rental licenses are the only areas where you can have a rental that's short-term, like an Airbnb. So we don't see a lot of that in terms of our community because we do have a pretty significant barrier to rental licenses, specifically in areas that have overlay districts that prevent either all or most license types from happening. It was mentioned in the study, really just in terms of the unknowns that are ahead. Again, I mentioned that there's currently state legislation that I believe was passed by the House and is sitting with the Senate right now that would eliminate significantly communities' ability to prohibit or even put regulations around short-term rentals. So that may make some pretty significant changes to East Lansing, certainly in other cities. We've been paying close attention to it and actually have lobbyists that are helping to serve the city's best interests in terms of that, because we're mostly worried about unintended effects it might have on our rental licensing program, which has been fairly successful in terms of ensuring that there's an adequate level of health and safety monitoring that's happening on our rental properties throughout the city. So we also are working to address housing and accessibility challenges facing seniors and our residents with disabilities. Specifically, we're trying to make information about kind of the universal design guidelines that are currently part of our code for anything that's new, that's built, it's over 4 units. But ultimately also trying to build those into the conversation so people understand that actually, thinking about adding in some of the universal design elements that maybe aren't required actually are, an assistant to help make things more marketable. We're certainly aware that, we have a growing demographic of older folks. And those there's a pretty significant portion that either want to age in place or downsize into a house that's more accessible, and so having some of these features designed and part of a new build can ultimately help diversify the market for potential buyers and renters, and that's something that we're trying to help with. We're also really looking at, again, through the programs that we have, how can we be more supportive to those folks that need resources to age in place, and ultimately, as we get into some of the other strategies, where are some of the places that aren't currently zoned for housing, where we might be able to open up zoning types that would really address some of the kind of more senior demands and the types of designs for units that seniors would desire. So that brings us to this challenge, which is this is our future land use map. It's part of our master plan as we kind of envision the future of East Lansing and what types of uses we'd like to see in large sections. You can see kind of on the top left, there's a big portion of blue. And that blue is really, currently it's mostly, residential agricultural uses, converting into what is now envisioned, or what is now currently zoned, a lot of like office type commercial type products. What's currently envisioned is a little bit beyond just office, and kind of more thinking in terms of like commercial employment type centers, but very limited in terms of the expectation that there'd be any availability for housing. In fact, almost none, other than kind of senior nursing care type facilities. And so one of the things that we are looking at currently is whether we should open up our master plan, look at this future land use map, and determine if there are areas such as, anywhere in this large area there, or other places in the city where currently, they're not envisioned for housing, or they're envisioned for kind of low density type housing, and to see whether some additional level of housing or additional level of density might make sense, given what we've learned from this housing study. And so again, this is another conversation we were trying to start this month with the Planning Commission, but ultimately we'll have to probably start this next month. But this is another, big conversation. We're going to need a lot of input, and it would be great to hear from realtors about, what types of housing you think would be marketable in these areas, and ultimately, if change was made to the future land use map, then some different types of zoning could potentially open up in that area, which would make projects possible. We have we've heard from folks, especially in the kind of multifamily markets that are catered towards kind of young professionals or seniors, that they think it's viable, but ultimately it'll come down to what our community intends for this area as we balance kind of these various pressures on our market. Hold on here. There was an error. Let me try to open up a different. Okay. So the next near-term action, hopefully you can all see this, is to review our single and multifamily zoning districts to consider any changes necessary to make them more effective in allowing desired housing types. And so, obviously this gets into accessory, I think I pulled it off the screen and I was sharing that screen, sorry. Accessory dwelling units, allowing for different types of, like kind of cottages or duplex, triplex, that sort of thing. Are any of these types of changes allowable or desired or necessary to help, again, kind of address some of that missing middle? And then consider policies promoting diversified housing types for new development. So currently, I told you about the kind of 25% rule that we have. We want to kind of take a look at whether that is actually being effective, whether there's some other things that we can do to, kind of more on the incentive side, the bonus side, to help, help move the development forces in a way that incentivizes them to really create some of these new housing types. And so there's a lot of big questions, and something that is going to take a lot of effort and a lot of time, and probably some experimentation, which is already kind of underway. But ultimately, it's good to be aware of these issues and have some strategies being implemented to try to address that. So the last sort of near-term strategy that we're working on is identifying opportunities to create more attainable housing for new professionals and seniors through various programs and partnerships. We think a lot about MSU. We think a lot about the types of companies that are growing or locating here, and how we can work together with them to provide available housing in places where people maybe don't need a car or can be closer to where they're working, or be closer to the university, or be part of our school district, be part of all of the amenities that we have, all those things. So I think we're really trying to get creative in terms of how to identify who those potential partners are, and what are the things that we can bring to bear in terms of public-private partnerships that would help to address some of the gaps that we have. So that was it for me. I did, in the one that I was previously sharing, I wanted to give you my contact info, which is basically tfehren@cityofelansing.com. And also just remind you that the housing study is available at cityofeastlansing.com/housing study. Similar to Andrew, if you guys have questions, please feel free to contact my office. We always like to talk about stuff when it's a concept first, if possible. And we can help you to sort of understand, what our processes are, or what some of our regulations might be around whatever property you're trying to deal with.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fehrenbach. I would like to thank Mr. Fedewa and Mr. Fehrenbach for joining us today. Thank all of you for spending the morning with us. Save the date reminder for our next GMM, which is February 24th at 9 a.m. We'll be going over home warranties and inspections. That concludes our GMM for today. Everyone have a wonderful morning/afternoon.